What's the worst thing that's ever happened to humans? At number 3 is the Great Chinese Famine. Now, this century definitely deserved to be on this list for being the deadliest famine in human history. The death toll estimates are quite staggering. Most credible estimates range from between 15 million to 60 million deaths, depending on the source. Guys, this would be like if all of South Africa starved to death, and quite rapidly too. All these deaths happened in just 2 years. The official Chinese government figure is lower, but many historians argue it was the worst famine in human history. And unlike most famines, which are usually natural, this famine was largely man-made. In 1958, Mao Zedong launched the Great Leap Forward, an ambitious campaign to rapidly transform China from an agrarian society into an industrial superpower. The plan emphasized massive steel production and collectivized farming, where private land ownership was banned and peasants were organized into giant people's communes. These policies disrupted traditional farming practices, leading to dramatic drops in agricultural output. Farmers were often forced to abandon their crops to meet steel quotas, famously melting down parts and tools to make useless backyard steel. Mao's officials were quite harsh on poor performance, so local Communist Party officials, afraid of being punished for underperformance, falsely inflated grain production numbers to please higher authorities. Based on these fake reports, the central government seized grain for cities and export, leaving rural areas with almost nothing to eat. Even as millions starved, grain was exported abroad to show the world China's supposed success, which was of course all lies. Mao's regime discouraged any criticism or complaints, acknowledging the famine was seen as treasonous. Officials who tried to report food shortages were often purged or punished. This suppression of truth allowed the famine to spiral unchecked for years. Droughts and floods in some provinces worsened food shortages, but they were not the main cause. Most historians agree the famine was largely man-made, the result of disastrous government policies and political repression. The effects were mass starvation and death. The death toll is estimated to be up to 60 million people, with some regional death rates exceeding 30% of the population. Entire villages disappeared, people resorted to eating tree bark, mud, they would dig through animal stool for grain or other foods. Villages went quiet, you wouldn't hear the sounds of birds chirping, any bird in the area was caught and killed for food. You wouldn't hear the sounds of farm animals and pets. Even animals that were primarily used for working farms and forbidden from being killed, such as oxen used to plow fields, were killed for food. Dogs, cats, and other kinds of pets or work animals were killed as well. People got so desperate they turned to eating clothes and other non-food items as well. People ate leather boots, belts, and clothing were boiled repeatedly to soften them and make them chewable. Some accounts describe people boiling the leather from book covers or grinding bones into powder for protein. And as is tragically the case in famines as severe as this one, in extreme cases, people would turn to cannibalism. They'd dig up graves for consumption, consume family members who had died, consume their very weak or vulnerable family members, sell children for food. Parents would even choose which child to kill to feed their other children. It remains the deadliest famine in human history, with some sources suggesting it even surpasses the Black Death in absolute numbers. The famine collapsed rural communities. The famine devastated China's countryside, where over 80% of the population lived. Families were torn apart, parents abandoned or sold children to survive, millions migrated in search of food, overwhelming nearby provinces and cities. Agricultural infrastructure was destroyed, livestock died, farmland went untended, and productivity fell even further. China's grain output plummeted by up to 30%. The country took nearly a decade to recover to pre-1958 agricultural levels. The famine shattered faith in Mao's leadership within parts of the Communist Party and in the idea of communism as a whole. Though the Chinese government never admitted the full scale of the disaster, historians recognized it as a catastrophic failure of totalitarian planning and a warning of how ideology can override human suffering. Plus, another fact that I think makes the Great Chinese Famine more horrific is just what people ended up resorting to in order to survive. Just how depraved humans became out of sheer desperation. I feel like that's also just a testament to how cataclysmic and horrific the Great Chinese Famine was. And remember, starving to death is one of the most painful ways to die. It's long, drawn out. People don't just die instantly. They weakened, starved, and often turned on one another. Entire rural areas collapsed socially and morally. People had to watch their family members waste away.
sometimes choosing who would eat and who wouldn't. Families sometimes traded children with neighbors to avoid directly eating their own children. You'd face psychological torment daily. The depth of human suffering was quite immense, and the way this famine stripped away humanity itself is hard to fathom. It was people watching their moral, familial, and human instincts disintegrate to survive, often in silence under political terror. You could say it represents the absolute limit of human desperation, what happens when starvation meets authoritarian control and isolation.
The famine left deep scars on China's collective memory. For decades, it was taboo to discuss publicly. Many survivors carried lifelong trauma from hunger, loss, and betrayal by the state. Even today, Chinese government censorship limits open discussion about it. It's comparable in death toll to World War II, but much less globally remembered. And this massive death toll occurred within just 2 years, making it one of the most rapid mass casualties on this list. It's definitely the worst famine in human history, and in my opinion, quite frankly, it's the worst governance failure in history. It stands today as one of the worst examples of the horrors of communism.